Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fialka. Today is October 2021. We want to thank the great Rob Grant for inventing the podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything and allowing us to hijack the show today. Rob, thank you so much.
Thank you. I didn't invent anything. I just discovered it. Bye
That's
now.
it. All right. And it's a real honor and a pleasure to be here with Glenn Johnston. Is that the correct way to pronounce that?
That's the correct way. Johnston with a T.
Glenn, there's so much to talk about here. Where are you calling in from?
Calling in from Manhattan, the Upper West Side of Manhattan, next to Columbia University.
Oh, cool. So the first question, Glenn, is what's the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being. The answer that James Joyce gives in Love, the word known to all men, in Ulysses, the word known to all men, love.
Oh, that is a great word. I love to get that answer. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
You know, I used to be a big reader of the printed book, and I have come to rely more and more on my computer and my phone, and I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I really do think it's rewiring my brain. It has become by default my favorite way of getting information, I guess. But I'm not sure that that's a good thing. I think it's changed my attention span. I think it's changed my ability to process information. And I see it changing everybody. You know, I see it affecting everybody. You ride a subway train or a bus or anything, and everybody's looking at their phone. You see people out on a date, they're looking at their phone. They're not even talking to each other.
Yeah, that was great. We do that as spoken word, printed word, and electronic word. So word has changed us. In fact, this is my brand new question I just invented today. Before we go, we're going to shoot this one in as a tangent. In the beginning was the word, and the word was fill in the blank.
The word was God or with God, if I remember correctly.
No, but I'm saying, how would you invent it otherwise?
In the beginning was the word, and the word was. You know, the funny thing, the first thing that came to mind, the word was go.
That's
I guess
good. You did it.
I'm a man of action.
That is super cool. Now back to reading just for a second, another tangent. Did you become a reader because your parents were reading as an example? They were telling you to read or on your own?
Mainly on my own, but my father was partly the inspiration. When I was a kid, I really only read nonfiction, primarily history, and within that, military history. My father was a World War II vet, and that had a very profound influence on me and my thinking, and kind of explained my love of history. It all seemed very immediate, the things that he and his generation had done, had seen, had experienced.
We're going to get back into that soon. And I appreciate you being articulate and concise. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Um, well, I guess it's an imperative. I mean, it's our progress, our advancement is predicated upon collecting information. You know, I mean, look at the earliest monuments man built. They were for like tracking the movements of the stars, or you know, we look at Stonehenge or the pyramids. We say, you know, in some regards, these are for you know, not just for, you know, these are more than burial mounds. There's an ancient grave in Ireland called Newgrange. The winter solstice, the sunbeam, it's like something out of Indiana Jones. You know, at noon on winter solstice or sunrise, the sun goes straight down the middle of the passage. They needed information to be able to build those things. Uh,
Right.
you
No,
know,
that's
I,
good.
I
Go ahead.
actually just watched 2001: A Space Odyssey again for the first time in a long time, and the whole monolith thing, you know, moving beyond being just a bunch of apes on the savannah to being something else, you know, that's predicated on information.
It's really good. And just a side note, Kubrick was asked why he made 2001, and he
Mhm.
said to convolate McLuhan. And then right in your neighborhood, he invited Marshall to the first pre-release screening, and Marshall fell asleep after 10 minutes.
That's funny.
But it's probably not completely true. He probably woke up and watched the rest, blah, blah, blah.
Uh-huh.
So the third question in this information line is this need or want to collect information more hardwired, more innate in humans, or more invented by humans?
I think the wiring is there, or the hardware is there, but you have to apply the right software too. Most people have a certain ability to assimilate and process information, but it has to be worked at to be useful. I mean, James Joyce, my guy, is a prime example of that. He was trained by the Jesuits. They said, "Show me the child and I'll answer for the man." You need to train your mind. And in fact, to kind of close the circle on this, I worry that electronic media are kind of untraining our minds, or training our minds in a way that may not be so good for us.
Wow, that is heavy, because I knew we'd get way off on tangents, but we've sort of studied that the wake is the hidden ground of the wake is electricity. So that's an electronic word. So Joyce is sitting in Paris in the 20s listening to shortwave radio and writing it all down. So it's like, the bottom line is Squid Games runs the world right now. Joyce invented Squid Games and disguised it as a book, Finnegan's Wake. Then they're done that. Or as David Lee Roth says, here today, gone later today. Anyways, do thoughts create emotions?
No, I don't think so. I think, you're dealing with something of a different order. To go back to 2001: A Space Odyssey, when Hal starts singing "Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer due," he takes out his higher functions first. I think maybe our emotions are a lower function and thoughts are a higher function. When you start removing the program to turn off Hal, it's the thoughts you get rid of first.
Wow, that was a great answer. Do you know how many people will not say no to that answer? So I love it. A lot of my questions, I like to give you the history of the who says what, and 80% of people answer a lot of them the same. And people tend, my favorite was the bass player for Blue Cheer, or he played in Blue Cheer, and he puts out an amazing magazine called Research, V Vale. And I says, do thoughts create emotions? He goes, emotions create emotions. See, I can tell you're a listener. Go ahead.
Well, also, that's a kind of unarguable answer too.
Well, that's the thing. A lot of my questions are, oh, I'm not a neuroscientist or blah, blah, blah. It's what I'm asking for is your hunch and your guess and your impulse. But you're a thinking man. And this is our delve into thinking. Is thinking more innate or more invented?
It's innate, but you do it the way you learn it. Again, to go back to the example of Joyce, the Jesuits trained his mind, and he drew on that training all throughout his life. I mean, he could maybe up to a point escape the religion, but not the schooling.
Yeah. Okay. Fill in the blank, Glenn, please. I don't know what I think until I...
My instinctive reaction would be express it. But actually, what I've learned is sometimes I can better refine or define my thoughts by writing, by having to write them. That's a great discipline. Having to write an essay, or write what to hone your thinking and structure it.
Well, that's McLuhan said, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
And then there's, a further, iteration in that then if you engage in conversation like we're having, and somebody challenges you on something, when you have to defend it or argue it, and maybe change your mind too. Maybe change your thinking. God, you don't want to just think the same way all your life.
No, that's beautiful because my book, I started with those quotes, and then there's a guy who quoted with Wittgenstein or some great philosopher about images. And then I start my book by going, I don't know what I think until I ask somebody else.
That's great.
That's why
You
that's
know.
why I'm addicted to questions.
Uh-huh.
And then we had this great line in our Dante reading group today about questions. And I was like, whoa. Okay. So can humans think without language?
That's a good question. My gut instinct says no. Otherwise, you're barely beyond emotion. It's like the apes or whatever there are on in the savannah in 2001. There's not a lot of thinking going on there, but there comes the point, the guy figures, hey, I can use this bone, I can do this. That leads to communication and organization and whatever, I guess.
I like that because in essence, it's an ape, but you said the guy, and there is the beauty of it is there is a guy in that ape suit.
Yeah, and there's a quote that I like, and it gets at what's knowledge and what's consciousness and maybe even what's thinking. The dog knows his name, but he does not know that it is his name.
Yeah. Yeah, that is good.
The
Whoa.
dog, he responds to Rex or Rover or Gracie in our case, but may not, what's the dog's self-consciousness or personhood? That's the wrong answer or the wrong word, but
Yeah.
what's a name to a dog?
Right. Because okay. So the next question is Chomsky says language is not just words, it's culture, tradition, unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is.
Mhm.
When language breaks down, what do you do?
Uh-huh. And I would say, language is more than all of that. Famously, when was it Nixon debated Kennedy, the people that listened to it on the radio had a very different take from the people that watched it on television. One
Yeah.
thought that Kennedy beat Nixon, one group, and the other group thought Nixon beat Kennedy.
Yeah.
So, communication, there's a lot of nonverbal communication.
Yep.
Like the signaling, you're nodding, you're
Oh, of
nodding at me
course. I
now. If
mean,
you were doing this or
yeah.
like
Yeah.
making
No,
some
the
other
beauty
gesture.
Well, yeah, the beauty is that Zoom allows us a lot of these interviews I did over the years were on phone. A lot of them were in a live setting.
Uh-huh.
But Zoom has us framed in a box, and all we're seeing is each other's faces and hands a little, and it's much more intimate, intense, and expressive. But as a public speaker, you might say something and you look at your audience and somebody goes, they grimace. Now, they might not be grimacing from what you're saying, or their way of grimacing means they like it. So
Mhm.
we try to read body language. But I'm just saying, in general, if language breaks down in any
Mhm.
form, how do you cope? What do you do?
Well, again, there are other ways of communicating. Touch,
Yeah.
if you lose when you think in a relationship, say, there's a cliche of a marriage gone stale or whatever. They might still be talking, but they're not touching,
Yeah.
cuddling, whatever. So there's a whole lot of, communication that's taken out of the equation.
Yeah. That's good. Just in general, your observation of other humans, I know it's both and it depends. Are people more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Well, I know some who are a lot more thinking, and I know some who are a lot more feeling. There's definitely both, for
Yeah.
sure.
Two Alan Turing questions from 1950. Is
Mm.
thinking a function of the soul?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. His other one was, can machines think?
Yeah, well, sometimes I wonder if I'd pass the Turing tests.
Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Now that's a tough one. Since the founding fathers said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I guess if I can't find happiness, I'll make do with meaning. And that's not as easy as as it might sound either. You look for meaning and hope to find happiness through that. The Greeks said the unexamined life is not worth living. What if you examine it and the answers aren't so great, or the meaning isn't there, or whatever, or it means something you don't like?
Yeah. But it's interesting. I sort of was inspired by Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And he basically says meaning can last and happiness doesn't necessarily. Do you think
Yeah,
that's
yes, I would agree with that. Yeah,
yeah.
and I haven't heard that, and I haven't read him, and there's quite a bit to chew on there.
Yeah. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating it?
Oh, I think it's both, and I think it's the interplay.
Yeah.
Again, to go back to our point about communication, you don't know necessarily what you think on a subject until somebody challenges you, until you have to articulate it. It comes into being by being articulated, by being thought out. It's not just necessarily there as something that you can pluck out, say, this is what I feel on this subject. And that's why discourse is so important, and being challenged. And that's why, you feel our politics today have taken such a bad turn. It's very polarized. There isn't that civilized discourse. There isn't that interplay. There isn't that give and take.
Yeah. You sort of pulled the curtain away. We call it the Wizard of Oz. You're the atomic dog, because basically my aspiration in these is to get people to jump out of their stock lines, because we feel, we're on automatic pilot. So what's fast, and I feel you're get going along with this and having fun. That's the main thing.
Yeah, well.
What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Well, nothing can exceed the speed of light. So that's a limit there. I'd go with light.
Yeah. Audre Lorde, the poet, said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Yvonne Rainer responded and said, "You can if you expose the tools." What new tool do you suggest? And this is a good example. I just throw these cute quotes out before the question sometimes. It doesn't mean you have to apply the quotes to the question, but you suss it out as you will. You put all these questions into the context you want.
Well, that's a really problematic one, because, again, to kind of circle back to some things we touched on already, we have these extraordinary tools, everybody in our pockets now. Every there's a cliche that the toaster has more computer processing power than Apollo 13, all that stuff. And to go back, to your questions about knowledge, we don't even need to know anything, because we all have a phone in our pocket that has access to the internet. And so is that are there tools we need to get rid of?
Ooh, that's good.
This is our master's house. Our master maybe Jeff, maybe the guys that run Google, Facebook, Amazon, Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, that's Social Dilemma, that movie where it's like all the guys who invented the internet, which were hippies who took LSD because the CIA gave them LSD, and then they invented the internet so they could tell everybody what the CIA did, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, in this Social Dilemma movie, it was all the younger generation of the kids who invented Silicon Beach, and they go, "Yeah, we should pay a little attention to what we've invented. I won't let my kids use this stuff."
Well, there's an old joke that predates the internet where, all the world's computer scientists decide to pool all their resources and build the mother of all computers that's going to answer all the basic questions. So they do this, and the first question they ask it is there a God? And the answer comes back, there is now.
There is now. Boy, I'm getting a lot of good jokes from this session. There is now. That is good, because that's like, you go to your guru and say, "What's the most important question I can ask you?" And he goes, "The question you just asked me." What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I guess I worry a little bit more than I should. I do feel, I mean, this is a prosaic answer, but one of the things about like the COVID situation is it's kind of taken things out of our hands. You don't know how things are going to play out. The feeling that we are in a time, and I haven't been sick. Nobody really close to me has been very sick. But that you don't know where things are going, this kind of element of uncertainty or unpredictability, and how things will play out. So that's not a good thing. I actually do worry, like things like January 6th, what happened at the Capitol, things like that are worrying. You think this is a resilient country, 200 plus year old democracy, it's been through a lot. And then a challenge like that comes not just in our lifetime, but this year.
That
And
was weird. And
the authors and instigators are still out there authoring and instigating. So that's actually a little bit troubling. And the fact that I don't know if you get political or don't want to. I'm actually, I have some conservative instincts. I'm not wildly liberal on a lot of things. But the fact that one of the main parties has been so co-opted by these lunatics that they're bend over, going along with everything, that's very troubling.
no, this is beautiful. I appreciate your honesty and openness. That's what this is all about. And when Trump got in, I says, "Why haven't we stormed the castle?" Then it happened. I was like, "Whoop!"
And it was his guys. Yeah, yeah.
I didn't mean that way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. And it's troubling. And I feel, there are plenty of idiots on the left too. So,
Oh, no, definitely, yeah.
so I'd like to find a home somewhere in the middle, but that's looking increasingly, more unattainable.
Well, actually, we're slowly getting to that part. But this is what McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound was that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So, like you said, there's hidden psychic effects to our cell phone. And you're sort of saying, I'm almost sussing this out now because I'm going electronic word instead of more printed word, which was my roots. So
Mhm.
Marshall would say, well, we can turn to the artists, the writers, filmmakers, painters to reveal the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can cope with what we don't like you don't like particularly what maybe electronics do. So how do you cope with it? We can turn to them to reveal the hidden psychic effects, but we ignore them. So the question is, why do humans still ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Well, I mean, that raises a lot of questions. Are the artists broadcasting? Are you giving them too much credit? I mean, the guy that directs Transformers 14, is he broadcasting some cultural message or revelation to us? I don't think so. And yet, he's sure to fill, movie theaters across the country and around the world. So, what are the
But
artists?
let's go to our mutual hero, Joyce. He was definitely brought. I mean, believe me, I would say, Joyce invented Squid Games in disguise as a book, or he invented the internet. He invented the World Wide Web in disguise as a book. So yeah, I think you would agree. Joyce broadcast these hidden psychic effects of our inventions.
Yes, I would. Although, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm more of a Ulysses man than a Finnegan's Wake
Right,
man. And
right.
now maybe
No,
you
that's
can
fine.
shut me off now and say,
No, no, no,
right,
no.
I've heard enough. Why am I talking to this idiot?
No, dude. I'm for both. And I was reading your Twitter thing today going, holy moly, this is amazing to learn that Wilco's guy loves Finnegan's Wake. I was like, how did I not know that one? And it's beyond your Twitter thing. So I'm not saying that. I'm just saying in general. I know that you went for the Hollywood guy, but I mean just in general,
Mhm,
uh, movies are pretty cheesy in a way, but popular literature. I mean, these
mhm,
guys
mhm.
like who Gaddis or Robert Anton Wilson or or any you know, Burgess, they sort of revealed some of these hidden psychic effects in their art, but
Yeah.
why do humans still ignore it? I mean, I like what you're doing is helping me rethink my questions. That's what I
Mhm.
love.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I would say, those are all very popular and very successful writers, but how wide an audience did they
right,
reach? There's still at a certain, I don't know if elite, elite has a lot of baggage, that word.
no, it is. Yeah.
So there, so who are the artists that are,
Yeah.
or who's reaching tens of millions of people every day? And I certainly don't wish to denigrate like Oprah, who has
Yeah.
reached tens of millions every day, and she obviously has a great facility, connects with people,
Yeah.
projects to people. Yeah, who is?
I would say Oprah's not really revealing the hidden psychic effects because her aspiration is to let's talk about what's going on here. And so she's up front in all the power to her. But I'm just saying there's some. So, anyways, I'll tell you the answer I usually get is fear. They go, I'm afraid to understand what electronic word is really doing to me.
Uh-huh. Yeah, was it Auden who said man cannot bear too much reality?
Oh, that's great. Well, that's perfect because Auden also said, you probably know the exact quote. I paraphrase it, that the mystery of art is that we don't know if it pacifies us or activates us. We want to think, oh, it activates us and romantically think art is a good thing, but it may be putting us into a trance and not enabling us to see anything really, escapism or whatever.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and there, well, I don't read a lot of poetry, and Joyce didn't write a lot of poetry, and he's not rated, as a great poet, chamber music and poems penny each. But you just every now and again you realize the poets can hit it on the head more succinctly in a line or two lines than novelists can in 100 pages or 200 pages.
yeah.
Um, and you look in the papers every day, you'll see, Yeats being quote, the center cannot hold. I mean, in the context of, politics in the US, what rough beast slouching towards Bethlehem to be born, all of that seems just so apposite.
Yeah. No, you really get this. And I'm actually going to go to this question and then reference your tweet, something I read on your Twitter. Do artists have a moral obligation?
Um, to do what?
Yeah. See, no, wait. You're answering a question with a question.
You
Glenn, you win. That's what it's all about. That's the Irish. You Irish people answer questions with questions, and they go, "We do, eh?"
I would say an artist like the rest of us has a moral obligation. Thou shalt not kill, steal, whatever. Does his art, his ability, his talent bring with it an extra obligation? That's like the, Shaw, the doctor's dilemma. Do you save the talented cad or the basically decent guy who doesn't have any talent?
Yeah. Well, it's like that's what I'm talking about is raising more questions because that's the new question. Does artists have moral obligation? And most people are saying everybody has a moral obligation, and some people go, well, no, because you get these horribly, I don't want to say gross, but controversial filmmakers like Pasolini, and there's this horrible things happening in their films, but they're really highbrow artists and they're teaching us a lot. But it's like, do I have to or a good example is David Lynch's Blue Velvet. My friend goes, I know it's a good film, but I don't want to spend 2 hours of my life with these people. A great statement,
Yeah, but Lynch isn't even nearly as out there as some people. I mean, he's fairly
Right,
digestible.
right. And Louis
Uh,
Buñuel, my hero, he has, he kicks a blind guy and kicks a dog. And yeah,
Take
kicks an eye.
a razor
I mean,
blade to your eyeball.
to me, he is the old anyway. So
Well,
here's
the
what
moral obligation, I mean, a guy like Joyce, his moral obligation, he felt, was to produce his art. Now, he set himself even higher goals, to forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscience of my race. which gave rise to that.
Means what in layperson's terms, what does that mean? That
More than to tap into the unconscious. I mean, to create, I think he felt that an Ireland was being a borning, and that he could play a role in that by not being there, by not going back there, by producing a new art for it.
Yeah. Okay, so here's John Le Carre, spy writer and a spy himself.
Mhm.
It's visible. He is visible on almost every page.
Mhm.
The novelist should quote remain invisible. No, the novelist should remain, quote, invisible, refined out of existence. That's Joyce. And then the
Uh-huh.
next quote you had was the novelist should, quote, like God in the universe, present everywhere, but visible nowhere. Flaubert.
Mhm. Uh-huh. Yeah, and also, Joyce had this idea that God was just indifferent, like paring his fingernails while all of this is going
Right.
on. Yeah. The thing is, in my own case, I can talk about all of this. I'm not a believer, so and it's interesting. Can you be religious without being a believer? Joyce was deeply imbued with his Catholicism, but he rejected isms.
Yeah. Well, you have ESP because we're going to get to that in about 2 questions. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
My earliest memory of what?
Of any early memory, any early memory, can you conjure it up or tell us, And I usually say earliest, but just some people go, I don't know my earliest. I go, well, just an early memory.
Mhm. Being being very young and wanting to be in the grown-ups room, and getting out of my bed and coming down the stairs and like standing bawling at the door, and not being allowed in. And maybe maybe this is all deeply symbolic of feeling like an outsider at the feast or something like that. But I wanted in and I wasn't being allowed in.
That is amazing. One of my good friends who was homeless for years had a story where he would come home, well-to-do East Coast, and he would sit in the bath. He would do the opposite of yours. He didn't want to be with the family party. He would sit in the bathroom and read. And his mother would go, I don't want you sitting in the bathroom reading James Joyce. I think Joyce would appreciate that.
Yeah, and then of course, I mean, to go back, some of the kind of profound questions you've been throwing at me. What is memory? We're very suggestible. I came across a quote just in the last few days. Memory is repetition. Memory is what we tell ourselves. There's the kind of Rashomon effect where 10 people have 10 different takes on a scene, and one person can have 10 different takes on a scene, or maybe they weren't even there and they have a take on the scene.
Exactly. And Glenn, this is it, because I ask people their earliest memory, then they tell me, and then the next question is stupid, but I still ask it, and I'm amazed at how people take it. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Oh, it's a blessing for sure. Yeah. I mean, what are you without it?
Yeah.
What you're a blank slate. You're you're nothing.
Yeah.
and I'm at the I'm kind of at an age now where I'm thinking, I've got more memory than things to look forward to. So memory better be a blessing.
It better be. That's a better way to put it. It better be. Tell me someone in your early upbringing that's 2 parts, within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, like a role model.
Well, I would say,
wait, who was it? And then specifically, what was that impact? Just briefly. Yeah.
My father was a somewhat aloof and domineering guy. And he was in his 50s when I was born. So there were like 2 generation gaps between us. And he was old fashioned as it was. And by nature and also by the generation that he belonged to, not a very verbal, expressive, tactile guy. So I guess just by the power of the force of his personality, silent, fairly silent as it was, although when he opened his mouth, it was pretty loud. It would have to be him. And then,
But what would you say is the trait you got from him? What did you get from him? How would you verbalize that just briefly? What'd you
oh,
get?
that's interesting. I haven't really thought too much about that, and if it's such an obvious question, it's one I should have, I guess. In fact, when I look in a mirror, and like I'm looking in the screen now, and sometimes I see him, and it's like, oh, God. So that's a bit of a scary one. That's a tough one. It's not that I can't. I would need to think a lot about that one, and
Look,
even then, I
we
might.
can get back. We can get back to it, or you don't have to answer it. But it's
Mhm.
funny because Oscar Wilde said, "No, all when I turned 50-ish, my female friends who were 50 were fretting becoming their moms,
Uh-huh.
and my male friends weren't. And most of us were raised more by our moms, anyways. And,
Uh-huh.
Oscar Wilde says, um, men don't fret becoming their mothers, and that's their problem.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you, and what was that impact?
Outside my immediate family, or like my wife or whatever, I would say my high school teachers that treated us like adults,
Yeah.
and there were one or two in particular. I had a French teacher who just treated us like adults, even when we were being idiots, I guess, and even when we were being juvenile idiots. He was a cultured guy, francophone, francophile, had lived in Paris for many years, had had an interesting life, so I wondered, how the hell did he end up in my high school? But the small number of teachers that had kind of very worldly lives, that had gone out and done other things. There was one guy, he'd been like a hippie, and he'd hitchhiked around Latin America and ended up in the jungle living with some Indian tribe in Brazil. And he became a geography teacher. So I had a couple of teachers like that who'd gone out into the world. Now, most of them, had not done anything like that and didn't seem to have a whole lot to offer beyond the subjects that they taught, even if they were
Yeah.
good math teachers or whatever. But that small number of teachers that had done very interesting things, that were inspiring and that treated us as adults.
Beautiful. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Well, that's an interesting issue in my own case, because I grew up in Ireland, but we were Protestants in the south of Ireland, a tiny minority, and deeply conscious of our minority status, but not an abused minority, not an underprivileged minority. In fact, the Protestants had once had the whip hand, so to speak. They had once been the establishment,
Right.
ran the country, ran businesses and whatever. So we were like the rump end of that. So it wasn't so much a religious identity as a whole bundle of kind of social and cultural identities all in one.
Did you check out, or are you practicing still?
Yeah, in fact, I wanted to get that was partly to escape that mindset. And then, when I moved away, so I lived then in England and the States, you realize that much of it is the narcissism of minor difference, as Freud
Yeah.
put it. We only see the differences and build our identity on those differences and pride ourselves in those differences and magnify those differences. And that
Amazing.
can be very destructive.
Yeah. Do you pray?
Not really, no. No, I guess not, no.
If God exists, Glenn, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Um, hey, welcome aboard, Glenn. I'm glad to have you here. Can I fix you? What can I get you to drink?
Nice. This question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I'm going to set up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK says, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to the Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Oh, I don't know. Okay, the quote that I would throw back at you is, enemies are people typically that we hate or dislike, and hate is like taking poison and waiting for the other guy to die.
Yeah.
So you need to kind of not get fixated and clear your head of those negative thoughts. And I don't always practice what I preach in that regard. In fact, sometimes I'm astonished at just how petty and fixated I can be on, trivial things. And wasn't it Lincoln who said, "I destroy my enemy by making him my friend"?
Oh, really? That's Lincoln. Who said that?
Lincoln, but I may be
Oh,
I may be inventing that or misquoting him.
yeah.
It might have been
No,
Pee Wee Herman. I don't know.
no, I've collected a lot of them, but I love all of them. It's like anyways, we could go on and on, but that's interesting what you
But
said. Go ahead.
I
Yeah.
I do like that line. Hate is like taking poison and waiting for the other guy to die. I mean that puts it well.
Well, it's also, I'll just skip ahead to this question because it's applicable now. You create what you resist. That's a thought. I'm not saying I believe it or not. I'm just asking you to respond to it, but I'm going to get it set up a little. Bob Goldthwait morphed it into you are what you hate. And James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve.
Uh-huh.
Then Louis Buñuel said, thank God I'm an atheist. So, I mean, this line, one creates what one resists. You create what you resist. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it's like pseudo profundity. I mean, maybe there's something there, but I don't instinctively or immediately buy it. So now, if I had it explained to me, if somebody smarter than me said, "Here's what it really means," or "Here's what it can mean," then I might be brought over.
Dude, that's my middle name, pseudo profundity. I can't even pronounce it right, but I love that. That is so well put. Because I think in these, in these cutesy quotes, there's these twists, and this is, I think, what McLuhan has taught us so well is you don't settle for the quote. You try to take it farther. I think Joyce, that's McLuhan learned everything he got from Finnegan's Wake. So it's like this. He said, Wordsworth said, our reach should exceed our grasp, or what is heaven for? And Marshall reworded it. Our reach should exceed our grasp, or what is a metaphor? So it's stupid, corny, like pseudo profundity, but it is like, what is a metaphor? All language is metaphorical. Why do we have to have something in between us all the time? Why do we have
to go back to the point about reach and grasp and what we can see and what we can attain for, like it's been said, like the savage thinks the moon is like 10 feet above the tree.
Yeah.
The scientific guy knows that it's 250,000 miles away. And even knowing that it's that far away, he's more likely to get there than the savage.
That is so well put. Now, this perfectly leads into James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago, Volta Cinema. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of answers to that. And one is, an obvious one is with Transformers 14, we just want to be distracted or want some pap or entertainment or whatever. But the other thing is art gets its symbolic truth. It doesn't have to be literal truth. And so, truths are revealed through fiction, through storytelling, through archetypes.
Right. but let's just go back to Buñuel bringing up truth. He said another cute quote that 99% people go, that's great. I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, what do you think of that?
I like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
because that is not pseudo profound because that's applicable to a lot of situations. You think of religious people who are so cocksure of themselves. You're going to hell unless you do this. We're the elect. We're the saved. Um, you know, that's that's kind of persuasive psychology, I would say.
Yeah. What first attracted you to pursue journalism? Or just sort of walk us through briefly. You're in high school, you
Uh-huh.
go, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to study what? And then I would say, in the long run, what you do now is a type of journalism. You're a Twitter, a
Oh yeah,
tweet.
yeah. No, I would agree. Yes. So, my career has, in fact, I've changed careers more than jobs, and it was all kind of conditioned on the fact. So I grew up in this kind of very conservative city and in a kind of much more homogenous Ireland. That's changed vastly since then, and for the better in many respects. It's a wonderful place. But I just wanted to get the hell out of the town that I grew up in. And I was fortunate enough, I went to Trinity College Dublin and I studied law. And in Ireland, as in England, you can study law as an undergraduate. And I did nothing else. And my heart wasn't in it. So I didn't take any classes or courses in anything other than law. From the age of 18, I was studying criminal law, constitutional law, torts, legal systems and methods, all that stuff. And 4 years later, I graduated and thought, I should read a book. And I went to the library and borrowed some books. I'd read nonfiction as a kid. So I started reading novels. And so, I read the things that I should have read years before. I read like 1984 and, Great Gatsby and all those things, and Ulysses too. So that kind of um, um, partly explains my trajectory to where I am today. But my career has been a series of accidents, and I accidentally became a journalist because I was working for, of all things, I worked in financial services in the City of London briefly, and I met a guy at a party. And he said, what do you do? What do you do as you do at a party? And he said, I'm a financial journalist. And I said, I work in the city. And each of us said, oh, what you do sounds interesting. And he says, well, if you'd like a change, I'd introduce you to my editor. And so in England, traditionally, there haven't been journalism schools. You would start as like a cub reporter on a regional paper, and then hopefully, achieve some specialization. You'd be a financial journalist. Well, I started there, and I was very fortunate. And it was before the internet. So I was a wire service reporter covering the financial markets. And that training I have found has been very, tweaking to be able to condense information into bite-sized tweets with no literary merit whatsoever. It does require a certain craft. So, that's been useful.
Yeah.
And, I bounced around a bit. That was fortunate. That was a lucky gig for me in that I was working for an American company in London, and they transferred me to New York, which is how I got to New York, which is great. I love it here. And then my next stop, I worked for the United Nations for a few years, which was interesting. And most of my career has actually been in the private intelligence and risk consulting sector. So that provided useful training in kind of investigations and intelligence gathering and analyzing information and assimilating information. So
I'm just curious, what's risk consulting mean in layperson terms?
well, there's a whole spectrum there. So, the private intelligence world, it's currently in or has been in the public eye in the last few years because, Christopher Steele, the guy that did the Russia dossier on Trump.
Yeah.
So what you have is people who've worked in, various intelligence agencies and law enforcement go into the private sector and offer those services typically to commercial clients. Not, some firms in that space don't go near politics. That's just,
Yeah.
they don't want anything to do. Most of it is just for business custom clients. And a lot of it revolves around due diligence on business partners. So if you're going to go and open up a factory in China or bid for a license in Latin America, you want to make sure that you're not dealing with corrupt officials or people who have a bad history. So that's the kind of risk consulting and intelligence function meets those needs. So.
I really get it. So when did you start book collecting? Many years ago or recently?
So when I moved to the States, I thought, I should reread Ulysses. This was in the early 90s. The first time I read it, I was actually pleasantly surprised to be able to understand any of it. So I could understand some of it, and I was like, wow, it's. I know that I'm missing 99% of it, but I'm amazed that I can understand 1% of it. So I spent a summer in the early 90s rereading it carefully. So I would read a chapter, read some of the literature around it, reread the chapter, and made my way through it, and then started collecting criticism, and it just got totally out of control. And then I used to travel a lot for work. So wherever I went, the first thing I would look for was a local bookstore. And I did that all over the world.
So early 90s, you sort of started collecting books. When did you start your Twitter feed?
Just 2 years ago.
2 years. Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So maybe, again, you put these next questions in the context you want, but maybe as a Twitter, as a journalist, whatever. A screenwriting teacher told me a great film or great art or great, what do you call your thing? A Twitter account?
Just a Twitter feed.
Oh, Twitter feed. Okay. So, say a great Twitter feed is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art or great film is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process?
Well, my role is partly to educate myself and to share what I find with other people. That's my intention. And, there's a community, there are all these like sub communities out there, but I knew two things. One, having been trained as a journalist, but also in the intelligence world, I knew how to get information, hard to get information, and how to present it. And, because I have a library of 4,000 books, I have it there myself too. Not everything has been digitized. So, I have my own research library. So.
Nice. And then it gets to that point where there's no index or table of contents in some of these books. So then you have to rely on your special notes. So Marcel Duchamp says there's no art without an audience. How much do you think of your audience when you're creating?
Well, that's very interesting, because what motivated me partly, first of all, because what I didn't want to do, because politics is so toxic and I'm not woke enough for social issues, I never go near those. But I thought, well, Joyce is my thing, and there's a community out there, and there are people that go to conferences, and there are Joyceans all over the world, and his books still sell millions of copies every year. So maybe I can connect with some of these people. And when I originally started out, I thought, I'd be very happy if I could just engage with like 24 people that were serious about engaging, were might be interested in what I had to say, and that I might be interested in what they had to say. So my intention was just to engage with people, and it didn't matter if that was a small number of people, but you kind of build a network and build, you follow people and they follow you, not necessarily on the basis of a quid pro quo, but you end up just communicating with people all over the world, sometimes like-minded, sometimes not. It's very interesting. And this is actually, during the pandemic, this has been a good outlet and source of connection for people. Important. I mean, you can gainsay social media, and you can say it's warping all our minds or whatever. But you know, it's been a tool for communicating with people.
No, I'm amazed. I mean, I never really did Twitter at all. And today I started going through all your pages, and it was just like I didn't have to hit any special button or sign in and do a code or anything. And so, do you read the feedback yourself exclusively, or do I, not having a Twitter account, am I able to read the feedback on every one of your things? Is there a button?
Yeah, you know, unless people, sometimes, you know, people can restrict it. I never do. And, you know, sometimes people piss each other off and they block each other or mute each other.
Right.
But generally, it's just all out there.
But do I have to hit a button on each particular entry you have to read what people have input?
Yeah, well, you know, you'd want to set up your own account
I
and you
have
can
to have an
follow.
account to read the input.
Yeah, and follow people so that it comes into your feed. Yeah, but I mean, you can just go to somebody's handle and read, you know, access. You know, it's more laborious that way, but
Yeah, but I'm quite amazed at and appreciative of how much work you put into it. And
well,
go ahead.
I was just going to say again, it's partly educating myself. You know, I mean,
Yeah,
I'll just see something like, as an example. So I watched 2001. And then I thought, I wonder if Kubrick had anything to say about James Joyce. And of course he did. You know, he used to quote that Joyce, that mistakes are the portals of discovery. And then after he died, Steven Spielberg was interviewed about him, and he said he was like James Joyce. Every work he did was a new, you know, a whole new creation, something different. So it's interesting. You know, that's the fun thing about Joyce is, you know, so many artists, writers, visual artists, filmmakers have engaged with him in some way or another. You know, he's in their lexicon, or they've been, you know, like you know, McLuhan, you know, as you say, you know, kind of wrapped his career around and his writings around Joyce's writings. Others, James Brooks, the abstract expressionist, he said, you know, for me it was Joyce. He released all the artists in the
yeah.
world, which is an
Oh
amazing
no,
thing to say.
it's endless because if you read Peter Quadrino's Pantheon article where he lists all the biggies who got infected by Finnegan's Wake, and I'm like, dude, you left out Wilco. You look at on Glenn's. I mean, he likes that. He knows he has to do a part two. And it's amazing how much, but you know, and I'm impressed because you're so well, we call it comprehensive awareness. You have pattern recognition. You go with the Beckett, and you go, you know, it's not that exclusive in Elliot Pound and Wyndham Lewis, which is really the, you know, the hidden ground of McLuhan and Joyce to me is Wyndham Lewis. And I love your term that I didn't know what it stood for. OTD.
On this.
On this date is my favorite because I'm religiously reading obits in the New York Times. This is a very important lesson I learned from Mae Brussel, that you read obits and people go, that's gross. No, obits are an amazing way to study the universe and humanity. And you know, you mentioned, and he said it a thing. He said, artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future. The interesting thing is, by doing OTDs, you are living in the present today, this person. So that's the door of perception to open up into teaching us about something in the past. So like, we live in the present and write a detailed history of the future. That like sounds like a cute quote, and people go, what? It's really quite amazing. So, you know, it's mainly, I want to compliment you in that regard.
Well,
again, and go into McLuhan's line is everything we invent, and he learned this from Finnegan's Wake, extends some humanness. So clothing extends our skin, knife and fork extends our teeth, you know, whatever. What does philosophy extend? Something. What does Twitter extend for you? What humanness?
Well, I would just say, I mean, and you know, this isn't a particularly deep answer, just the ability to communicate with people all over the world, you know, just in real time. You know, like I'll send something out and I'll see there's some guy in New Zealand responding 30 seconds later saying, I love that book, or
Uh,
he taught me, or he was the greatest, or
yeah,
bullshit. I'm calling
yeah,
you out on that.
yeah, yeah. No, that's good because it's back to the Lewis. You're living in the present
Mhm,
and you're writing a detailed history of the future because there you're going, wow, I don't know this person.
mhm,
And all of a sudden I'm friends with them with electronic word.
mhm.
That's why,
Yeah, and I don't want to get too carried away with this either. Like I like going out and seeing trees and walking in the country too and all that stuff.
yeah,
I
yeah,
like
no,
touch and
right.
and in fact, um, I would much rather talk to a room of 10 people in person than 1,000 or 100,000 people through a screen.
Yeah. But let me tell you, I ran Finnegan's Wake Reading Club for 25 years in libraries in Venice, in Marina del Rey. COVID made me go online. I've done meetings besides that, of all kinds of discussion meetings, talking about current events and questions like these for many years. All my meetings for the last year and a half have been better. And people go, that's gross. And I don't really want to return to live meetings. I still see people daily in my life. I
Uh-huh.
ride my bike through Venice. I'm always engaging with people live. We were lucky during COVID, but everyone is more attentive and we're exchanging eye contact and verbal
Mhm.
exchange more intimately and directly than if we were in a room
Oh,
together.
that's
And
interesting.
I'm
Huh?
sorry, I'm sorry to say that, but
Uh-huh.
Peter started his Finnegan's Wake Reading Club 8 years ago in Austin, and now I attend that one. I continue ours, and I do the Sweeney's one, and it's way better. It's more expansive, and it's like that when Marshall flipped all his aphorisms mid-career and he flipped the global village to the global theater mid-career because when Sputnik went up in 57 it formed a prosimian arch around the world and we're all living in a stage, the world's a stage, and
Uh-huh.
that's what we're all, this is a live TV show. That's what
Uh-huh.
we're doing right now. We're like Ernie Kovacs or Elia Kazan or any of those guys in New York making live TV. That's what this is.
Uh-huh.
And it's so simple. We didn't have to hire a crew or anything,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Like for Rob, it's like, how much am I not paying you? Double that. But he loves it because he's an inquiring soul. He wants
Uh-huh.
to learn. And so
Uh-huh.
he's like, so the next question is, what was, oh no, Michael Apted, famous filmmaker, made 28 and Up and Coal
Yeah.
Miner's Daughter. And he was making a Russian rock star movie 40 years ago when MTV started. I says, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? And this is right when Marty Scorsese is saying, I'm cutting my films faster because of MTV.
Uh-huh.
So, and most people don't know, Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922 in France, but it
Uh-huh.
really flourished right when MTV started 40 years ago. And he says, because we've learned to take in information faster. I asked this question with a bias. Can we literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Um, Again, I'll throw you back a question, what kind of information? What are we taking
Yeah.
in?
Yeah.
And I worry that my attention span has been shortened to tweets,
Yeah.
and I don't read as deeply as I should. I collect and love books. I don't read books. I read so much of what I read now is like on a screen or a phone. I mean, I do read books. I mean, I'm not totally kind of negating them. But as I was saying at the outset, most of my reading now is done on a screen, and it's short term. So that's troubling. And MTV doesn't even show music videos anymore. So where did that
But
get?
the speed of editing, it has even sped up since MTV. But the bottom line question, the hidden question of this is Glenn, is it literally possible for humans to multitask?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think so. Again, you would ask yourself to what effect. And the other thing is, our consciousness is operating at different levels and different streams. And, there are things going on in our mind that we're not aware of, and that maybe even, maybe even some other people might pick up on, cues that we send. So, there are things going on. Right now I'm quite focused on our conversation, but, maybe my mind is, my lizard brain is,
Well, no,
something else is
that
going.
you anticipated a question. I'll just shoot to it. T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
That's interesting. Well, I mean, the most prosaic answer to that, it's obviously in English. And I do have a dialogue, not, Joyce famously is associated with the monologue, the inner monologue.
Yeah.
But we do have an inner dialogue. And then that begs the question, who's talking to whom?
Yeah.
And, to go back to my concern about, where we are, body politic and the polarization, people aren't even talking to each other. And I suspect there are a lot of monologists out there. Fox News is full of them.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because people, when I say what language is your inner dialogue in, and they say English, I follow it with what form is your inner consciousness in?
Yeah, that's it's hard to dissociate consciousness from language, though. And then I suppose that begs the question, it makes you think how enriched people are by having great fluency in more than one language, because with another language comes different thought patterns, different associations, different cultural baggage. Maybe more more means, the French word for death. Maybe that has different connotations for a Frenchman than death does for an Englishman or an American.
M-O-R-E.
M-O-R-T, mort.
Oh, mort is the
Yeah.
French word for death.
Yeah, maybe just
Oh,
that.
that was good. I that was a good thing. I thought more is the French word for death.
Does I guess you could ask yourself a basic question like that. Do the most basic realities, do they mean different things in different cultures?
Oh yeah.
And is that associated with language? I don't know.
Yeah. So I never asked this question anymore, but I got to. Jean-Luc Godard told Michael Moore that his film Fahrenheit 9/11 was going to help Bush get elected. Now, it didn't help Bush get elected per se, but it galvanized pro-Bushers because they would go, oh no, and the guy made a film anti that. Over the last, let's say 20, 30 years, we've had a slew of political documentaries. There's a lot more, but I'm going to go back to 60s Battle of Algiers, which is an amazing film because it's a fake documentary.
Yeah.
And Guido Pontecarvo, the director, said, what are you trying to do with this? Or what does your film do to people? And he goes, teach them how to make a film. And then guess who used it as a training film? George Bush. Guess who used it as a training film? The Black Panthers and the people in Ireland. So this film is so much like what you want to do with a great film, not agenda and tell them how to think, but go, here's something you can study the patterns and decide for yourself. But the question is more, this, like Colbert, political docs, do they more activate people or pacify people?
I would say if they activate them, it's on a fairly short-term basis. They amuse, entertain, and distract them.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody goes to the polls with Colbert's witty aperçus, in their head. And I like him. He's a good guy. He's incisive.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of an impact they have. I am concerned that, like the and I won't use an expletive, but I'm tempted to. People like Tucker Carlson, the effect that people like that have, it's quite troubling, having been a journalist and looking for a center and wanting to think of myself as a thoughtful person and whatever else. And these guys are out there just spewing this nonsense on a daily basis. And obviously there's an audience for it. And acting as a sounding board for people's worst instincts and impulses, not good.
Yeah, but in the long run, Glenn, does it enable people to develop better critical thinking skills? Or can it? Yeah.
It certainly hones their skills at shouting at the television. I don't know.
What's more important, conviction or compromise?
I would say that's a kind of a yin and yang question.
Yeah. Very good. You've accomplished a lot. Rate these three elements: luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
Luck, skill, and ambition. Okay. You've got to have, it's got to be underlaid by ambition. There's got to be some ambition. You got to have some skill, but luck, luck runs out, as they say. You need ambition, and you need some skill, and luck runs out. So you need you need a bit of all three. But the first two won't get you. They're necessary but not sufficient. Let me put it that way. There are lots of smart people that are never gonna. There are lots of people writing great poetry in their attics. They're never gonna be read or heard of.
Yeah, very good. Is loyalty based on reason?
Well, I guess I'd look to the persuasive reason of like The Godfather and great lines like that. A bit of both, first, family first, if you look at The Godfather or, Goodfellas or,
Yeah.
any of those shows. But, calculated self-interest comes into it too. I mean, that underlies it.
It's very good. I love in the Don Rickles documentary, he says, Vegas used to be cool when it was run by the mob. Now it's run by corporations and it sucks. That's like, whoa. So what, just your hunch, what was the motive of the cave artist?
That's interesting. I would say I would like to think self-expression. I don't think, when they were drawing like cattle or buffalo or whatever they are on the walls of the caves in France, I don't think they were trying to pacify some god. It doesn't look like that to me. I think, and I like to think, it was more about self-expression. Maybe, they were like recording the kill or something like that. I don't know. It might have been as prosaic as that. I think I'd like to think as well, self-expression, they learned that they had a facility for something, that the results could be pleasing and could be refined and could be made better and could draw out a response in other people.
Yeah, very interesting. This experimental filmmaker called himself a degenerate sociopath last week. He's very good at his art, but I says, what was the motive of the cave artist? He says, to keep people in the cave.
That's a much better answer than mine.
No, it is funny because that never dawned on me. It's like, why do you want to keep them in the cave? No, you want them to see where they can go get the food and go get the food. But he's saying no, he wants them, to eat grapes and drink wine and look at the cave drawings. Like, I'm staying here.
It's like having your Barca lounger in the basement with your...
Right. But this is a good lead into this question I asked, because one of my experimental film heroes, George Manupelli, his mantra was ignore yourself. And Jonas Mekas, who's right in your area, showing experimental film for years there, he says there is no self-expression. Cecil Taylor, who played piano right in your area, avant-garde pianist, said, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. So this question's sort of stupid too, but it's basically, is art making, writing, bookmaking, filmmaking, more self-expression, or more you're a vehicle for whatever technology or culture is dominant?
Well, I mean, a very competent pianist is a great example. Nobody starts out a competent pianist. They may learn quickly, but they have to learn.
Yeah.
So, and you have to learn. It's a skill that you have to learn, and to produce good music, you have to learn good music.
Yeah.
So the pianist is not a unique example, but maybe different from the others. Because um, uh, it's a technical competence as well. But then I guess you could say that about painters and filmmakers.
Well, no, it's a good example, but I'll use the example of Ginger Baker, the drummer for Cream. He said, "Where'd you get your sound?" He says, "I was in London when they were bombing us, and all I heard was boom, 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 boom." So that became part of his consciousness, and it went right into his playing. But he had to listen to jazz drumming because he came out of jazz to play rock drumming, and he developed that as a skill.
uh,
But it's sort of like Joyce. Was it more and I mean, we would probably agree, the greatest writer in the history of mankind, of humankind.
mhm.
Was he reflecting shortwave radio in was that part? Yeah, go ahead.
He was more of a creator.
Yeah,
He was the transmitter. He was the signal and the transmitter.
both. Yeah. Signal and transmitter. Very good. Is perception reality?
Well, was it Robin Williams who said reality? Now there's a concept. Um, Perception is our reality.
Yeah.
But I mean, who was it? Was it? It might have been Einstein, maybe not, who said, not only is the universe queerer than we suppose, it's queerer than we can suppose.
Yeah.
So we don't even have the mental facility to even be sufficiently confused by what's around us. And as like reality, this table I'm sitting at is solid, but there's vast empty spaces between atoms and electrons and whatever else. So
Yeah.
it's a construct in certain regards.
Yeah, Lily Tomlin says reality is just a collective hunch.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength. We're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you've incorporated to become a strength.
That's interesting because if you've ever done like martial arts where you make it you make a weakness a strength. In my own case, it's not that I made a weakness a strength, but people have called my attention to times when I've been boorish, crass, insensitive, unthinking, and have tried to make myself a little less boorish, a little more thoughtful. I mean, that's not making a weakness a strength, but that's maybe the best answer I can give you.
No, that's yeah, I understand. It's just even able to recognize it, hearing them, and then you raise an awareness on it. So anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
When it can be controlled and directed and then done away with.
Nice. It's funny because that question used to be, can anger be a productive emotion?
Mhm,
And then people
mhm.
could just simply say yes or no.
Well, yeah, I went with your question.
No, but it's interesting because you almost went back, because sometimes I go, no, I should return to the way I used to ask it, because people have said, no, it's not a productive emotion. What's the most significant difference between women and men, physical aside?
You're gonna get me in trouble here.
Sorry.
Especially since we're at a certain place in our society where, you know, dwelling on differences or putting people in categories can get you in trouble alone. I think, you know, the physical differences between us have resulted in maybe some biological imperatives that account for some differences.
No, that's
You know,
good. Yeah, look at that's fine. What caused matriarchy?
It depends where, but you know, they're the ones. You know, the women are the ones that carry the children. First of all, that's undeniable. Although, you know, recently we've been getting into the territory of having discussions about pregnant people, not pregnant women. So again, we're going to get in trouble here in this discussion. You know, allowing for the sensitivities of people who are concerned about that. You know, women carry children. Um, they, you know, in many societies are the primary caregivers, and you know, the hand that rocks the cradle and all that. So I guess.
Yeah, no, that was good, and I don't mean to. I'm totally understanding where you're going, but I have to bring up this one I love because it sort of sounds so absurd, but it's funny how people have reacted to it. The word mafia begins with the letters M-A. Women run, I'm not saying I believe this or not, but it's been said women run the world, but they let men think they run the world. Any comment?
I would say that would certainly be applicable in my domestic situation.
How do you find peace of mind?
I'm not sure that I always do. um, well, there, you know, it's interesting because, you know, if you've ever, you know, taken like a yoga class, or even certain martial arts, you realize, you know, when somebody talks you down from your normal state, you realize that your normal state is often to be just a bundle of tension and knotted, misdirected or undirected energy. Um, you know, and I didn't stick with it, but it made me aware that my normal state was to be, and most people, I'm not unique in this regard, to be just a bundle of tension that they're not even aware of. So it's I guess, to lose yourself in something, to lose yourself in an art or a craft or even a hobby.
Yeah, it's well put. Glenn, we got about 8 more minutes. Do you mind if we go a little over, or you stick if you want?
8 minutes is good. Yeah.
Okay, so Utah Phillips says anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled or should make the rules?
Well, there, you know, I do believe in like the idea of the social contract that we, and it's not one we necessarily enter into willingly. You know, it's not like I cede some personal authority to a greater authority to look after my well-being, but that's how it is. You know, your society, you need some order, you need some regularity, you need some enforcers. Otherwise, it's not good. I mean, you can call it what you want, anarchy or whatever. You know, I live on the Upper West Side. I was walking my dog last night, and there were cops everywhere, and they said we had reports of shots fired. I'm glad that there were cops there and not people shooting at each other.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
John Basil Barnhill was a socialist. He said, where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fears the people, you have liberty. Then 2005 film V for Vendetta paraphrased it. People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. How do you personally handle false fears? Like when they say we have to have a war on drugs or
Uh-huh.
war on poverty.
Yeah, that's silly. You know, to employ all that terminology is not good, and there shouldn't be fear on either side of the equation. But all too often, you know, if people can't get respect, they'll settle for fear. Um, you know, and that applies, you know, to, you know, government officials and gangbangers on the street and whatever. You know, respect is a much better motivation. One thing the United States has a much more active and engaged civil society. In a lot of countries in the world, people just take whatever the government says. Now, in some regards, that's good. Look at the Scandinavian nations where there's a high degree of like social cohesion and consensus, and things work pretty well. And then you look at less fortunate countries in the world where the governments are just predatory and rapacious. I guess America is has a certain amount of consensus, but it's also got a very engaged and active civil society. You've got all kind. If you want to do something, like if you want to build a new subway line, you're going to have to deal with all kinds of like environmental interest groups and business interest groups or whatever. In some regards, that may lead to paralysis. Nothing can get done. That's what the Chinese government would say. But in other regards, maybe it produces, if not the best outcome, a more palatable outcome. I don't know that I'm answering your question, but
No, that was good. It was good. And actually, what I like and I learned from one of my political activist friends was motives and consequences. So I'm going to jump back to Joyce because you handled that well. Because I don't want to. I want to enable you to teach me more about Joyce too, because you're a great teacher in that regard. And we know what he says. Why I wrote Ulysses. Why I wrote Finnegan's Wake. But I like this line from Leo Bersani's Mallarmé study. He said, the very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition. Now, I don't even know what that means, but it sounds like it means something. And how does that apply to Joyce and his motives?
Yeah, but again, I'm with you on that. I don't know where he's going with that, with the crisis.
Yeah, the crisis were just, but what got Joyce to write was writing itself, because we take Finnegan's Wake as language about language. So it's sort of like, what do you think? Why do you think Joyce pursued writing, not what he said he did, your own hunch in studying him?
He obviously had a gift. He thought he had a great gift. He did have a great gift. To go back to the idea of the pianist, he learned, he had the music in him, but he had to learn the skills. He was influenced by the symbolists, the French symbolists,
Yeah.
but he was influenced and assimilated many other writers and schools of writing and art forms too. I think he was a creative genius. I think he was impelled. I think, all the things he said were probably true. I think he probably did think he was forging in the smithy of his soul the uncreated conscience of his race. He was a craftsman. He did get a bit carried away. His instinct was to pile it on and keep adding and throw more and more in, whereas Samuel Beckett's instinct was the diametrically opposite of that, like strip it away, get down to the core, and then remove, take away what you can't do without, and then get rid of half of that.
No, that's great, because I've had it out with the Zizek personally a couple times, because I like to ask these stupid questions like, who's better, Joyce or Beckett? Now, most that world's so big, a lot of people will go, oh, Beckett's better, but and that's what Zizek says, oh, Beckett's better, yeah, blah 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 blah. So I think it is amazing that we have both. They're both important, and that we can suss them out. So in that regard, it's funny because Joseph Beuys, the great artist, he wrote an additional chapter to Finnegan's Wake, and he said, make the secrets productive. Lou Welsh is a beat poet and an ad man. He says, guard the secrets, but constantly reveal them. But it was Thornton Wilder, who, pretty much ripped the Wake and wrote Skin in My Teeth. And yeah, you ever read that book he's got of all that book that Thornton Wilder of all his letters? I mean, amazing.
Yeah.
He said something I think is important. He said, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. Glenn, you've laid your cards on the table for 90 minutes. I'm really grateful. I'm not insinuating you haven't answered this, but what's it really all about for you?
The art. Um, the art, I could give you some simple answers to that. Joyce said, you find the universal in the particular. And I guess and to go back to your question about luck, ambition, skill, it's just luck or chance that I happened upon him in some regards. I'm Irish, so I understood some of it. I love books, and he wrote books. I guess it's become more than a fascination. It's an obsession with him, his art, his books, his publishing history, the influences that he had and those that he influenced. And there's nobody quite like him. Bloom's Day, celebrated around the world now, and attempts to like get a Dalloway Day going look kind of lame by comparison. Virginia Woolf would be horrified at the thought that she would be regarded as like a cheap secondhand imitation of Joyce. That's what Dalloway Day will be. Now I'm going to be in trouble with the
Yeah, no, that's fine. Don't worry about being in trouble. Well, I just have a couple more that I really appreciate it. These are 5 Alan Watts questions, just in like 3 to 5 words, just briefly. Who started it all?
Who started it all? I'm not even a believer, but the simplest answer I could give you would be God. Now, was it Alan Bloom or Harold Bloom who said, Shakespeare invented consciousness? There's that.
Oh my God. That guy, I got so into him when I read him in Esquire magazine. I goes, how do I not know about this guy? He is such an amazing writer and talker about literature. I think he's one of the greats. Okay. That was good though. Are we going to make it?
Are we going to make it? Yeah, I've got to believe we are. Yeah, I'm optimistic on that score.
That's
And when
good.
you look at all the things, like global warming or nuclear war, you just gotta believe.
Where do we put it?
Where do we put it? In your pocket, as deeply as you can.
Nice. Who's cleaning it up?
Who's cleaning it up? Certainly not the man.
Is it serious?
It's serious. Nothing is more serious. It's deadly.
Oh my God, that was good. So just a couple more. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
I'd say that looks awfully like my resume.
That is a creative answer. Boy, I can tell you a lot of my favorite answer, I'll tell you really quick, was this woman said, because you're such a great literature person. She says, well, I'd take the velocity of that bag of shit and I'd use it to swoop my way out of the vat of vomit. I goes, do you know that's the descent of the maelstrom? She didn't even know, but that's how McLuhan starts his first book, that if we're swirling in this information overload, why don't we use it to get our way out of it? So I think that's what you're doing with your Twitter feed, is you're swimming in this overload.
Well, yeah, swimming or drowning. Wasn't it was Jung who said of Joyce and his daughter Lucia, they're both going to the bottom of the river. One of them swimming and the other is falling. So
yeah, I love that too. And then, what's the healthiest cultural shift you see developing today?
I would say environmental awareness. I don't know if that can be described as a cultural shift, but
that is.
People being more thoughtful about the costs and consequences of all kinds of things that they do, whether that be driving an SUV or eating meat, or wanting to be more thoughtful about the costs and consequences.
Yeah. And in closing, Glenn, this has been so enlightening. I really appreciate your time. I hope our discussion will never end. We'll keep going. What gives you the most optimism?
just man's resilience and creativity, you know, to go back, are we going to make it? Yeah, I've got to believe, you know, hopefully we'll be smart enough to figure out answers to the problems that we're dumb enough to create for ourselves. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's Frank Zappa. He says, they say that oxygen's the building block of the universe, but I think it's stupidity, you know, that well, us not knowing can keep us going, you know. Glenn, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Really enjoyed it, and you've made a believer in Zoom or similar out of me.
There you go. And I know we switched. I'm a believer in your Twitter account. You can be a believer in Zoom.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn.
Bye.